I guess the best way to start is if we could get an overview of how presenting organizations are coping right now. What's going on over there? What's the thinking?
Well, it's still early days, and it's going to be very difficult for venues to open, I would say, in the foreseeable future. Certainly in Europe, quite a lot of major events have been cancelled now up until the end of September. We haven't at Wigmore Hall publicly announced whether or not we're closing again from September. We would have to reopen first, of course, but it's possible that we're looking at a winter closure. And the whole concept of social distancing is fine, but I'm not quite sure that we'd be able to do that every night. And because we would hemorrhage, most organizations would hemorrhage. And remember, in a lot of Europe, there's a 1 meter social distance rule in theatres. For the UK as a whole, it still is 2 meters. So that's the difference between a 20% house and a 40% house, depending on the size of venue. And then policing people just in terms of social distancing on the street before you open the doors, in the foyer, at the bars, on the way to the facilities, you know, when people are at the wash basins, all that sort of thing. And then in the hall itself, probably we could seat families in clusters, but then separate households further away. And it's just the economics and the logistics. There are a lot more questions yet to be answered. So yes, we're looking at it, but no firm way ahead. And of course, every venue is different, every orchestra is different. Some of us are funded in different ways. We're talking a lot to our colleagues in Europe about what's going on there. Some interesting trials, particularly in Czechoslovakia and in Germany this week. But we'll take it from there. So it's you know, there's a deal of anxiety, but we've got to be cautiously optimistic as we look ahead. Right.
Now, tell me about the recital series that you all have planned for June at Wigmore Hall. Is that completely underwritten, or how?
Well, BBC have come in as a partner, and then private sponsors have come in, and it's 20 concerts on each weekday, more or less each weekday across June. 1 o'clock live on our website, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and then also live on BBC. And the concerts will stay up for 30 days. We couldn't have done it without BBC or without this generous financial support. We're hoping to do it again. We've committed to doing it again in September if we're not open, and possibly again in November, although BBC hasn't yet committed to November. So we could well do that under our own auspices. And it's given a glimmer of hope to musicians here, because it means we start with soloists and duos. We put on quality music. It's a step beyond some of these Zoom events which have been going on, which are marvelous. But it's also just musicians who are now preparing for a worldwide audience again, even if it's in an empty Wigmore Hall. At least it's a step in the right direction. I wish it could be more.
It will be broadcast on BBC.
It'll be broadcast on BBC and live on Wigmore Hall's social media and on its own website, so you can watch or you can listen.
Wonderful. How did this come about? Did the BBC come to you, or how did that work?
Well, I still watch Sunday Mass. So on Easter Sunday, I watched Mass from one of the churches here in London, and I noticed that it was behind closed doors, and there were 2 priests on the altar, as well as an organist and a singer. And I thought, well, if they can do it, if they can stream with video, so can we. So I went to BBC with the concept then from that, and suggested to them that if we did it, it shouldn't just be 1 or 2 events. It had to be a big statement. And they're such wonderful collaborators. The controller there, Alan Davey, got back to me straight away, and we talked at length about the various risks that we had to manage, logistical and otherwise. And we came up with a mutually agreeable list of performers for this. And then there'll be a completely different roster of performers in September. Musicians were not quite crying on the phone, but very emotional when I rang them. And one of the first people I called was Mitsuko Uchida, who immediately said yes. I thought that she'd take time to sleep on it, but she lives quite close to the hall, and she said she'd like to do Winterreise, the Schubert song cycle Winterreise with the tenor Mark Padmore. And despite the fact that we're in high summer in June, this is a bit of a winter journey for all of us. So Winterizer, I suppose, is appropriate. I didn't want to open the season with Winterizer, so I put it at the very end.
How many people will be in the hall at any given point when there is a person, two people on stage?
Two people on stage and possibly a page turner. Where possible, that page turner will come from from the home of a pianist. If we need a page turner, we don't need a page turner for all the concerts. And then I'll be in the hall towards the back. The presenter of the concert will sit with microphone towards the front, and that's the radio TV presenter. And there'll be one person working on each level backstage. So one person for BBC and one for Wigmore Hall working on all the various technology. And the rest can be done remotely. We have a permanent link to Broadcasting House to BBC, and we're the closest concert hall, which means they don't have to bring along any broadcasting vans. So it's a relatively easy setup because we broadcast year in, year out with BBC anyway. And we can actually control our remote cameras, which we left in place when we closed on the 16th of March. We can control those from our homes if necessary. So one of us can actually read the score and call the camera shots and all that sort of thing as the concert progresses. So it's incredible that we're able to do this with minimal interaction and minimal staff. And then all of the interaction will be by radio or by email or text backstage. So the piano tuning even has been worked out. How do we decontaminate the piano post-tuning and make sure that nobody else touches it before the concert starts, apart from the pianist who's playing? We've decided that there's one piano already on stage that will remain there, so we're not bringing pianos in and out. I can't bring in a harpsichord. We don't want teams of people moving instruments about. We'll have a lute, we'll have a guitar at some point. Hopefully that will improve the autumn. We have a 4-hand piano recital, not 2 pianos again because of the logistics and the amount of people involved in moving things about. And those 2 pianists share a household, so that's not an issue.
How big is your staff?
We've got about 100 staff, 70 casuals, so people who check tickets, ushers, cleaners, cloakroom attendants, and then 30 core full-time staff who work right across all the various disciplines: marketing, public relations, finance, IT, fundraising, learning and outreach. So we have furloughed most of the 70 staff who are casual and a number of the full-time staff. But at the moment, there are about 15 of us, I think, working full-time towards getting this concert series ready and up and running for June, because that's quite a task. We're also on a daily basis reimbursing the public for the concert that was meant to happen. Some people are being very kind in donating. There was a much higher rate of donation at the beginning of the crisis. And I think there's a bit of fatigue because we've got to be very careful with our fundraising messages. And we're not going to launch an emergency appeal just yet, because none of us can predict how good or how bad this crisis is going to be. We're doing our best as presenters, as promoters, to find a way back. And this is certainly for Wigmore Hall the first step.
The orchestras in the UK are generally funded by the government up to 50%. Does that sound right?
Some of them, but not all.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a different mix.
Right.
And same for venues, different mix. So we're all on different, and chamber orchestras get less than the big symphony orchestras. Some of the regional orchestras would get, the totality might be 50%, but that doesn't mean that every organization is getting 50%. So there's quite a mix there in terms of what people are getting. But from Arts Council England at the moment, there's emergency support of 160 million, 90 million for those already who are funded as national portfolio organisations. And as I said, that's not every single musical institution. 50 million for those outside of that core funding, and then 20 million for artists and creative practitioners and freelancers. So, and that's across every art form. So it's not just music.
When you say national portfolio, you're talking about the major institutions.
Yeah. Major institutions are regional institutions that are funded by the Arts Council. So, and again, just because institutions have Arts Council support, they still have to make up that sponsorship, that ticket sales, the touring mechanisms. Certainly, we're only 3% funded as a national portfolio organisation, and that's not unique. Our worry is for everybody, those inside and outside of a national portfolio, because we're all in this together. There is anxiety amongst audiences. We know that anecdotally. We know it actually from some surveys that have been done. Indigo, a very prominent marketing company here, has done a really huge survey, and the result from that is that certainly anxiety at the moment persists. Of people of all age groups, those under 30 a bit more willing to come out, those in their 50s and above not as willing to sit in an auditorium, social distance or otherwise. So in a way, there's a slight cultural fear that we've got to get over to win back audiences.
I wanted to ask if you had any particular advice for your colleagues in terms of dealing with this crisis.
Keeping in touch and being there for each other. This is not about coming first. This is not about just preserving ourselves. There is an ecology in music. There's an ecology in this country's music. There's an ecology in international music making. The artists, their agents, producers, promoters, venues, orchestras, opera houses, we're all in this together. And we know we're not going to come back 100% from this. But hopefully we can come back in a way that hasn't permanently or won't permanently damage that ecology that's so vital across all of those networks. Sometimes we complain about the industry. Now is not the time to complain about the industry. Now is the time to just get together. It's different in every territory. Mm-hmm. And I think we should just all be there for each other. These are very difficult times. And the most important thing is that music is preserved, and that all the work that so many of us have put in over many decades, and our predecessors as well, we need to salvage what we can of that. We need to salvage the livelihoods, particularly of freelance musicians. Music will be poorer if we don't get through this together.